So hello, I'm Tiffany Fennell, Chair of the VA section of Division 18, and I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar titled Updates from the VA Psychology Training Multicultural Diversity Committee, presented by Drs. Jessica Fulton, Joseph Fineman, Darlene Davis, and Jessica Jackson. And this webinar is sponsored by the VA section of APA Division 18, Psychologists in Public Service. Division 18 is considered the home division for VA psychologists in APA, as well as for other public service psychologists, like those in community and state hospitals, Indian country, criminal justice, and police and public safety. For more information about Division 18 and the VA section, please check out the files and web links pods for a brochure and links to our website, Twitter, and Facebook page. And you'll also find a copy of today's slides in the files pod that you can download for reference. All questions can be entered into the chat box, and we'll leave time towards the end to answer any questions. And if you experience any technical hiccups, just let me know in the chat box and I'll try to get those squared away for you as quickly as possible. So our presenters today are current and former members of the VA Psychology Training Council's Multicultural Diversity Committee, which was formed back in 2009, so I guess going on 10 years now, to promote integrated quality care for veterans by assisting the VA in training culturally proficient psychologists. Our speakers are Dr. Jessica Fulton. She's a psychologist and Assistant Director of Psychology Training at Durham VA Healthcare System. We also have Dr. Joseph Fineman, Clinical Psychologist at Miami VA Healthcare System. Dr. Darlene Davis, Psychology Fellow at VA Detroit, and Dr. Jessica Jackson, a postdoctoral resident in clinical psychology at the VA Greater Los Angeles Healthcare System. So I want to thank our presenters so much for being here today and being willing to share some great resources with our group. So I'll turn the mic over to you guys now.
Hi, this is Jessica Fulton. Thanks everybody for being with us today. As Dr. Fennell said, I'm a psychologist and the training director of our internship here at the Durham VA. And today the title of our webinar is VA Psychology Training Council Multicultural Diversity Committee Resources and Innovations. So about 6 years ago, our Multicultural and Diversity Committee, which I'll refer to here forward as MDC, did a presentation for Division 18 on diversity training in VA psychology. So we were really excited and we were invited again to discuss some of the updates about what we've been doing over the last several years. So actually, Dr. Fennell has already noted who's going to be presenting with us today, but I should note that Dr. Jessica Chin was also a key contributor to this project and a lot of projects on the MDC, and unfortunately she couldn't be with us today, but I did just want to highlight her contribution. So the folks listed here, we're just a smaller subgroup of the MDC committee, and as you'll see in a minute, there are many people on the Multicultural Diversity Committee. So, as I said, it's been 6 years since we first presented our activities, and the MDC is incredibly productive. So our aim for today's session is to briefly describe the history and the membership over the years and current membership of the VA Psychology Training Council, MDC, to talk about areas of focus and the projects and resources that the MDC works on continually to create, refine, and update, and to talk about how you all can use these resources and materials at your own VAs or other settings and to increase your participation in diversity activities. So in developing this webinar, our group really wanted to ensure that after learning more about MDC, we're sort of getting updated on MDC and its offerings, that you all would have plenty of time to ask questions and provide input. At the end of this, there will be an opportunity for us to discuss, and Dr. Fennell will be moderating the questions, so feel free to write down any notes or questions that you have, and we'll get to those at the end. So in terms of the history of MDC, the VA Psychology Training Council formed the MDC as a subcommittee back in the fall of 2009. So at that time, that was part of a larger effort to increase diversity programming within postdoctoral fellowships. So The MDC was composed of a group of diverse psychologists and a postdoctoral fellow, and they met regularly to address diversity issues related to training and staff development. And at that time, initially, they were focused mostly on promoting awareness, understanding, and appreciation of diversity, also for veterans, trainees, and staff, and then also fostering a training environment that promotes the development of multicultural competence for trainees and staff. So today, the mission of MDC is to help create a culturally proficient training program that encompasses attention to the following areas there that you see on the slide. So recruitment and retention, which is a big one, especially now with the transition from the GNPs to the SOAs. Supervision, clinical training, research, consultation, and then program evaluation. So it's been 10 years since the VA, this MDC committee started, and it's still going strong. And I'm going to talk a little bit about membership. So I've divided these slides up into past membership of staff and then also of the trainees that we have had over the years, and then I'll talk about our current membership. So if you look here on this slide, you'll see all of the past members who were staff members, and the folks who have asterisks by their names, those are the founding members of the original MDC committee. And then Drs. Loretta Braxton and Linda Mona were the founding co-chairs for the MDC. And there's a few folks here that I don't have the actual location because I have only been on the MDC for about a year now, so I actually didn't know these original folks from 2009, but I did want to make sure that they were represented. And the current, at that time and then currently, staff members can be on the committee for an unlimited term. We've also been really fortunate to have terrific fellows and interns on the committee. So these are some of our past fellows. And I think many of them are now in VA working as psychologists. And we usually limit trainee positions to 1 year just so that we can have opportunities for people every year when they're in training to be on the committee. And then these are the past interns who've been on the committee. And as you look through this, I'll just say that it's really important to note all of these people just because the things that we will be talking about today on the webinar are not things that were just done by the current committee. And so I just really want to highlight that these are efforts from people over the years that have been evolving, and everybody, we're really fortunate because a lot of the people, or all of the people who end up on MDC are super passionate and really get involved with a lot of projects. So just want to give everybody kudos from over the years. And this is our current membership. And the nice thing about MDC is that because there are no terms in terms of time limit to be on the committee as a staff member, and because the people who end up on the committee are really passionate, we don't have a lot of turnover. So we still have some folks who have been there since, well, for many, many years. Maybe not the original folks, but long-standing members. So I'm about to end my part of the presentation, but I just wanted to introduce you to the 4 areas that the MDC focuses on when they're developing projects and materials for VA psychology training programs. And so one of those is the developing resources, and Jessica Jackson is going to talk more about this, but this includes PowerPoint presentations and training modules. And then another area that has been a big focus, especially over the past couple of years, starting in January of 2017, was accreditation and policy. And Darlene Davis will talk more about what we've been doing in that area. And then we also put a lot of effort towards discussion forums and consultations monthly, and additionally inclusiveness projects. And Joseph Fineman will talk more about that. So now I'm going to turn it over to Jessica Jackson.
Good morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the resources that the committee over the years has developed that are available primarily on the SharePoint site for people. As Dr. Fulton mentioned, I'm a current postdoc member of the committee. I've really enjoyed being a member of the committee, and I'm currently at the VA Greater Los Angeles Healthcare Center. So on the SharePoint site, and I think we're going to try to send out a link. We sent out a link last week on the Diversity Psychology Listserv, which is where we often are able to send out a lot of our resources. We have a SharePoint site that has a ton of resources, primarily training modules. And so our training modules, primarily the diversity ones, are created to be standalone presentations that can be adapted to kind of suit the unique needs of individual training programs. So they are PowerPoint presentations, and the idea is that you can, most of them are kind of long, that you can modify them to what your trainees' needs are at your particular site when you're reviewing, either for your diversity didactic or for people who are wanting to get deeper conceptualizations for their patients. So several of the topics that we have on there, we've created a religion and spirituality module. We have past committee members have worked on cultural adaptations for evidence-based practices for trauma, such as for African American populations using prolonged exposure. We also have cultural adaptations for social skills training for Latino populations. We have rural health, and on the SharePoint site, you'll be able to see that they are kind of divided into folders, and then when you click on the folder, you're able to access specific training modules. We have revised several of the modules in the not too distant past. Also, every month we have a diversity discussion article of the month that gets added to the SharePoint. We actually also send that out. The committee sends that out via the VA Psychology Listserv. So once a month there'll be an article that has been selected by the committee, and often it may elicit some discussion on the Listserv, and a lot of people find it helpful. I believe last month for June, there was one about just being women and working in the VA and being aware of things like sexual harassment and how women are talked to in the VA. And so the article, I know for my training committee locally, we used it. And so the articles are really used to help facilitate discussions for each site. We also have training modules that are posted on the APA Division 18 Psychology and Public Service VA SharePoint site. And we did a presentation at the AVAPAL earlier this year, and that presentation really focused on kind of what we're talking about today, kind of where the committee has come, what they've done, things that they're working on. They talked a little bit about the standards of accreditation, the diversity standards of accreditation that are coming out. So there's lots and lots of resources available, and they are useful for training. And we're happy to even help if people have questions about it or how to utilize them. I'm going to show an example. So here's an example of what they look like. Just when you click on the SharePoint site, you'll be able to see the PowerPoint title. So we have ones about privilege and power, the social skills training, working with veterans in rural communities, cultural adaptations. There are many, many didactic presentations that have been created, and they are, like I said, pretty long. Some of them are like 50 to 78 slides. And the idea is really just so that you can have information and then be able to kind of shorten or adapt or modify as needed for your training presentations. And Dr. Fulton also just put the link in the chat for people to see if you want to be able to, because it's hard for us to show it during the presentation, but if you want to be able to click on it, then you're able to click on it and kind of see what I'm talking about, kind of play around in there and explore. We also kind of our future goals, things that we are currently working on. So if you have any resources, anything that you think would be a good addition, please let us know so that we can update our resources in a way that is inclusive of everyone. So we're planning to work on updating the LGBTQ transgender module. The experiential exercises module was just updated. We actually did a presentation on that last week. And so on the SharePoint site, there are now experiential models. So in addition to the topics that I just showed you, we also then have a separate folder that have those topics and give step-by-step directions for different training exercises that can be facilitated with trainees. So for example, there's one about supervision and diversity. And so we may offer a case vignette, or we may say, here's an exercise, we'll tell you where we adapted it from, and literally we'll go step 1, introduce it, tell you what to say, step 2, so that people who may not be as comfortable with certain topics can learn ways that they can facilitate the exercises. We did also do a consultation call last week where we talked about kind of some of the important things that facilitators need to be aware of when they're facilitating diversity trainings, and that is also on the SharePoint site. So that's also a PowerPoint that is in addition to the actual exercises, is things that you might want to be aware of, how to be inclusive, how to be a facilitator and a participant, so different ways to be able to facilitate the exercises. We're also looking to complete cultural adaptations of cognitive processing therapy and prolonged exposure for Latino populations. We're also going to be working on developing a process for revising and updating our learning modules. And we're also currently working on a narrative therapy recommendations as a component of the diversity training. So really wanting to look at and expand our recommendations for evidence-based practices. And so wanting to think of like not only by population, but what are different practices that can be used universally that also incorporate the wholeness of people that we work in. In addition, one last thing to add is that every month we also do, that was on the original slide that I started with, we also do consultation calls. And so currently there's 2 calls. There's one that happens monthly that's a little bit more informal. There's no didactic. And it's just intended to be a warm and welcoming space for VA staff to improve diversity training and to help develop their own diversity committees. And so there might be a general topic, but it's really a space for people to call in and share ideas. And I have joined in on one of those calls. And it's a really nice space to hear what people across the country are doing with their diversity training. There's also another call that happens, but that is a little bit more didactic, like the one that we did last week for experiential exercises, which also just kind of provides a little bit more training, a little bit more kind of instruction on how to facilitate some of the diversity exercises. There's also a question and answer for that, and that also is really nice. Is people are like, I'm not sure how to do this, or how can I bring this topic up? How can I get examples? And so both calls are really great spaces for people to share and to learn from one another. And typically those calls are advertised on the VA Psychology Diversity Listserv. And we typically try to send out a save the date about a month in advance. Right. And so now I am going to turn it over to Dr. Darlene Davis.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to speak on the area of accreditation and policy, and I am joining you from the Detroit VA, and I'm also very grateful to serve as a psychology fellow on the NDC, and it has been a grand experience. I've been very involved in learning a lot about the resources, so I'm happy to be here to share this information with you. I believe this information I think is most useful for the training directors and those involved in ensuring that the programs are following through with the recommendations and standards. And so in this area, the MDC has focused on a couple of major projects, and these include a needs assessment on factors related to internship or residency site selection among diverse applicants. Another project was the presentations on cultural competency and diversity related topics, which Jessica touched on a bit earlier. And then also providing content on the new standards of accreditation on diversity. So speaking on the needs assessment, that was a project that was launched in September of 2018, and it was an online survey disseminated nationally through VA contacts with the purpose of gathering data that would provide programs with information in 2 specific areas. So one was diversity issues that are most impactful in terms of recruiting qualified trainees. The other was factors outside of the training programs that took precedence for trainees during the selection process about which programs would best meet their training goals and needs. So some of the findings that came from the survey was that VA trainees perceive the VA as having provided or having noted in various ways a different diversity training experience. So the feedback was more, people or the trainees perceived that the VA would offer a unique diversity experience that would be fruitful and helpful. Other information that came from the survey was that microaggressions occurred on interview days, and that specifically in the VA and also throughout other interview experiences and searching experiences that contributed to bad impressions. And so the survey noted that that was hard for the trainees to really recover from that process, and so that definitely influenced how they determined where they would go. Other information included the intentional consideration of diversity factors that seemed to make a big difference for the trainees in their selection process. And so things like noting that there was a diversity committee, or just being intentional about expressing or describing your site in various ways, both in person, verbatim, or in print, that your site was had a culture of inclusion. And as an extension of that, the trainee suggested that opportunities to engage with issues of diversity in such areas as didactics, professional development, psychotherapy, and even through clinical assessments should be noted in the program brochure, so that that could be information that's readily available. And so moving on to the presentations, in an effort to collaborate with other entities on topics of diversity, the MDC presented at the American Academy of Clinical Neuropsychology Conference, as well as the VA Psychology Leadership Conference. At the Clinical Neuropsychology Conference, the members presented on a cultural competency training within interdisciplinary teams. So, and this content is also available on the SharePoint, specifically how to address or how to infuse or take a culturally competent approach when working across disciplines. That's available on the SharePoint. And also at the VA Psychology Leadership Conference, the members shared about the results of the needs assessments noted above. And so there is a future plan, which I'll talk about a little bit later, to do more with the needs assessment data. And with that, the final project focused on the completion of the Meeting the Standard of Accreditation, an informal guide for psychology training programs in addressing cultural and individual diversity. That was made available on the MDC SharePoint to directors of clinical training. This document is considered a living document because it was created to offer recommendations and examples of ways to assist programs in implementing and documenting diversity efforts to meet the standard of accreditation. And this example is noted on the next slide. And the document specifically focuses on areas where you can receive feedback, examples, recommendations on how to address and account for and document the area of diversity that impacts institutional and program setting resources, implements the program climate, implements program specific aims and competencies, and learning elements to develop competencies, as well as outcomes and program effectiveness. And these are all things that actually seem to really connect very well with the needs assessment and what the trainees had voiced as what was important for them in looking at aspects of diversity. So there's an example on the next slide. So here you'll see the standards of accreditation for the health service psychology, the document presented, and then right next to that is the document, the Meeting the Standard of Accreditation. That document also has been made available on the SharePoint. And again, it is a living document, and so that's important to note, because what's important and what we hope to gain from this particular talk, this webinar, is feedback from you all on what have been some of the challenges you've experienced in wanting to meet the standards and document your efforts, as well as what would be the most helpful to be added to the document if it, again, meets the needs of the VA DCTs and the programs. And then lastly, the slide that is next will focus on our future endeavors in this particular area. So our future goals have to do with, pretty much as I said before, really honing in on how to provide the most support around culturally competent dynamics, specifically in the area of providing guidance and support for training programs in the area of culturally competent supervision. As we know, supervision is kind of like that document, a living experience. So, you're constantly growing in that area. And so emphasizing the role of self-awareness in the supervision has been discussed, as well as examining the content of the supervision curriculum, which can be a very rich place for MDC to make recommendations and to assist in the shift away from the content to the effective learning through experiential activities, which MDC has done an excellent job at updating the SharePoint that Jessica mentioned earlier about ways to facilitate experiential exercises for your trainees and within your program. The other part that this particular area will focus on moving forward is submitting the results of the needs assessment for publication. So there is another subcommittee that's working to pull together an article that really highlights both the quantitative and qualitative data that was collected from the needs assessment in a way that focuses on trainee selection process, as well as specific diversity factors that we believe the DCTs would find useful for programmatic reasons. And then finally, developing a diversity committee toolkit, which essentially will provide the most useful combination of resources for DCTs and programs in a way that is supportive of the larger mission that Dr. Fulton mentioned earlier about both recruitment, retention, and other facets of training that can uniquely be infused with diversity aspects. So yeah, I thank you for hearing this part of the presentation. And if there's anything that's come up as I was sharing this information, please feel free to write it down, because again, this is an area that we can really use some support and information from those of you out in the field. And so now I turn it over to Dr. Joseph Fineman.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to talk about the two last areas that we have, and we're talking about them separately, but there's an overlap between the two. I'll discuss that a little bit later, but as Dr. Jessica Jackson was saying earlier, there are some forums and consultation projects that we have that go on either on a monthly basis or on a quarterly basis, and also a discussion listserv. So I'm going to list each one by one and go through them a little bit, and we can further discuss what these things are targeting. So the first one is the diversity discussion listserv. So every month we send out an article of the month, and we have a listserv where, as it states there, and I believe that's the most updated information that we have, 388 members, and it's a topic in a different area of diversity. And what we're trying to do is to expand the discourse for people to critically think about some of these areas that are affecting our veterans' lives or affecting us as providers, and to be able to grow this community, grow this understanding of diversity, because it's so vast, it's so broad, it can be taken in so many different directions, and we're all works in progress. There's no definitive experts in these areas, so we're trying to kind of build on what it is that we do know and explore some of those areas that we want to consider. And in some of the future slides, you'll see some of the general topics that have been done through the listserv. Another area is diversity consultation teams. So we have at least quarterly calls. Sometimes we try to do two things. One is we try to set up quarterly calls, but we try to leave space intentionally. And the reason we leave space between calls is if one of the consultation calls brings up an interesting topic that we want to explore further, we want to allow some flexibility to maybe before the next consultation call, add another call on there. But as was mentioned earlier, these are quarterly calls. We send out a save the date at least a month in advance, letting different sites know that we are going to be offering these different diversity consultation team calls and expand the topics in different areas. And the purpose of this, or the reason a few years ago we decided to do this, is we wanted to, yes, we provide resources, we provide, as stated earlier, some modules that help training sites and other individuals kind of get a little bit of a greater grasp of some of what's out there in the diversity literature, what can be helpful at particular sites. But we wanted this interactive piece, this piece where, people are trying to actively problem solve on how to implement these at their sites, or maybe some of the challenges or some new topics or ideas that can further be fleshed out, that can provide help for different sites. So that was the kind of where this consultation team approach came. And the format is roughly the first half hour of it's an hour call. The first half hour we discuss whatever the subject matter is and what the purpose of the discussion and what the literature tells us in different areas, or what different experiences at different sites and so forth, depending what the subject matter is. And then the second half is all Q&A. So we allow space for people to kind of really dig into these subject matters and find out, wow, that's interesting. How can I apply that to my site? Or yes, I face this and I've been trying to get this this avenue explored where in my workplace. Or oh, this is really good for me to be able to kind of help process some of the stuff that's going on with me when I'm working with a specific population or whatever the case may be. We want to allow time for people to really explore these topics, so it's not simply us listing information as quote-unquote experts and not really having it be a real lived experience where individuals can learn from. So those are the consultation calls, and outside of the consultation calls, and the discussion listserv, we also are active at different conferences. So as it states there, there was a round-table discussion at about cultural competency and multidisciplinary teams at a conference in 2017 in Portland. Unfortunately, I don't remember the initials there, and I'm sorry I didn't present that. If anyone on the call remembers, please let me know. But that was done. That avenue was used in that at that time. And then for the last 2 years at the VA Psychology Leadership Conference, as you can see from the slides, there have been different presentations expanding on different areas of multicultural issues. I'm going to go ahead and jump to the next slide. And as we were saying, these diversity consultation calls happen on a quarterly basis, but can happen more often. But when they do happen, they're on the 4th Tuesday of the month. And these are just some recent topics that we discussed: race-based stress and trauma group interventions. Race-based stress for those sites. If you're not working in a VA, or even if you're working for a VA, one of the approaches that has been used to kind of discuss diversity issues is providing race-based stress groups. And different sites call it different, but it's discussing the effects of having to deal with race-based stress and trauma, either for the veterans or the participants themselves, or intergenerationally, what it's like to be in communities that have experienced different race-based stress. Religion and spirituality, structural competency, and structural competencies trying to expand that use of cultural competencies, looking at organizations and finding out how culturally competent at a structural level are we functioning. So, and standards of accreditation. So these are just a few of the calls, but again, in any of these calls, the first half or the first 30 minutes is presenting an overview of what's going on in these areas, and the second half is open up for question and answers. And so in having provided these calls, some of the things that have transpired in these nationwide calls is education and clinical materials that different VA sites can use. Oftentimes, someone in a call, whether it's a presenter or someone in the audience, will bring up, oh, I use this resource to help with this. And then we try to gravitate. If we don't have the resource ourselves, we try to ask individuals if they're willing to share that and then provide it to the whole group. New clinical offerings and didactics, and collaborations among VA psychologists at different sites. So these are just some of the benefits of these consultation calls. And in that same spirit, the diversity discussion listserv, these are some of the articles and some of the topics that have been brought up on different months, where if you're a member of the listserv and you read the article and you want to kind of expand the conversation, you just post what your reactions are or what your thoughts are to any of these topics, or what was provided, and then hopefully building up and expanding that discourse. And some of our future goals in regards to this discussion forum is to continue growing membership, and to continue growing membership both on the consultation calls and on the listserv, and continuing to develop diversity consultation teams that will provide presentations and consultations on a whole bunch of different facets within diversity work, to assure that we're doing what we can to help sites all across the country meet their diversity needs, both with their trainees and their staff. And also to provide feedback to training communities regarding strategies for recruitment and retention of diverse staff and trainees. A big focus in our calls is how this information can be applied to help your sites, not only with the training itself, but also on making this, and this will kind of jump into the next area, a more inclusive environment that is more welcoming and more applicable to recruit and retain both staff, diverse staff, and trainees. Okay, so then this kind of leads into the next area, which is the inclusiveness projects. And this is also a multifaceted area of our work within the MDC. One of them is building our alumni network, as Dr. Fulton discussed earlier. We do have a pretty big network, both of individuals that are currently on the committee now and those that have worked with us in the past. And everything that you've seen up to now, and even what I'm discussing, is done through the work that we've all done collectively together. So whether one is continuing to participate in the committee or not, we want to continue to build this network. And in fact, in my time, and I've been on the committee now, rough estimate, about 4 to 5 years at least, and I've seen at least 1 to 2 committee members. I'm sure of one. I'm pretty sure it's been at least 2, if not more, that have at some time left the committee and then rejoined the committee later when their responsibilities changed and they had the ability to come back and join the committee. So we want to keep this vibrant network available to us, and especially since we do have trainees on the committee. Some may choose to continue their career within the VA, and some may choose to step outside the VA. We've increased our trainee committee members from 4 to 6. And this is the other, the next point there is the other area where we do have calls, like we talked about the quarterly consultation calls, but we just recently started an inclusive diversity forum. And this one's a little bit different than the consultation calls. The premise is still about the same. We'll send out a save a date and tell individuals that we'll have a call on this date, but where the consultation calls have a real specific focus, the forums, which are monthly, they're not quarterly, are intended to provide a safe space for providers to discuss whatever they want to discuss in regards to diversity. Either some of the challenges facing at different sites, seeking resources, how do they build on their own sites, and it's supposed to be a safe space to be able to conduct this work, because what many of us find in doing this work is, whether you're in the VA or not, that it does require a lot of different ways to do this. It does require a lot of energy. It does require facing a lot of different challenges and obstacles. And sometimes when we immerse ourselves in the work, we don't fully either understand how it's going to impact us or how we can get through some difficult obstacles, depending what those may be at our sites. So we wanted to provide this avenue that would allow different sites to be able to voice some of those things and see if together, as a collective, that we can find some ways to help in that process. Okay, let's do the next slide. Other inclusiveness projects that we've attempted is testing out the MDC post on the VA Pulse. So VA Pulse is those that are not outside the VA, and even some in the VA, is kind of the VA's attempt at creating a social network within the VA to help providers have discussions with each other, to post things, to, if you have resources, you could put it on there. And for the last few years, we've tried to develop in the MDC our VA Pulse site and tried to make it active and bring in different voices and discuss a whole bunch of different things. Right now, and I think tested out is the appropriate term, because people pretty much, or what we've noticed, people tend to gravitate to what they're familiar with. So they may be familiar with other social networking outlets, but not yet familiar with VA Pulse. So we're trying to continue to use that as a way to get the word out and to expand the discussion, because it is a really helpful mechanism if it's incorporated and used. So I think we're still trying to find the right fix on how we can use VA Pulse the most effectively. But again, this is part of the process that we're in to kind of include this inclusiveness. So whether you're on the MDC or not, this is another way to stay connected. And then the next point is MDC resources and project is introduced in Division 18 VA teleconferences, including goals of inclusivity and MDC activities. So essentially what we're doing now, we're discussing and getting the word out on some of the things that we're doing and trying to be as inclusive as possible, and so forth. And again, as stated before, assisted with multicultural panel discussions at 2017 VA Psychology Leadership Conference. So panel discussions, more formalized discussions at different conferences. These are all different ways that we're trying to promote the inclusiveness of the MDC. We're building that alumni network, as you can see in this next slide, that we're going on 10 years now. And up in 2018, we compiled and updated MDC alums from 2009. So that, again, required us to kind of look at some of the individuals that are continue to work in the VA at different sites, but also bringing in some of those individuals that are in the MDC but are outside of the VA system. And an alumni event at the Psychology Leadership Conference in 2018. And also trying to find, and this is part of a future goal, which I think is on the next slide, creating mentorship possibilities for MDC alum to mentor junior colleagues. Okay, so some of the future goals within inclusivity is developing a clearinghouse of VA psychologists with diverse expertise who'd be willing to share their expertise with other sites. Again, as we mentioned before, further developing a mentorship program for trainees, having the inclusive forum calls as a means of support and resource for VA sites to process and expand diversity training experiences, and increase participation of interested VA psychologists through the consultation team calls and the Listserv, which we've discussed, and kind of growing that process, and working on developing the VA Pulse. So again, these are all the areas where we're trying to increase our inclusivity and make sure that regardless of the site that you're working at across the country, or whether you're not an MDC member, that you're in the fold and that we offer these resources to be able to help sites in their journey. All right, at this point, this kind of ends the formal part of our presentation. If you guys have any questions, anyone that's on the discussion, please feel free to either state them out loud, or if you want to kind of in your chat, go ahead and provide any questions. We'd be more than happy to answer them. Unfortunately, I need to step away. There's a conflicting meeting that I have to go to at this time, but I'm sure that Darlene and Jessica Jackson and Jessica Fulton can answer any of those questions. And if there's anything about the inclusive forum or consultation calls or Listserv that you'd like to know more information about, please list it down, and we'll go ahead and I can answer those questions offline if any of them are.
Thanks, Dr. Fineman, and thanks to all of our presenters. It looks like we have a question so far in our chat box from Dr. Smith. The question is, how do we join your Listserv? And so Dr. Fulton wrote that we can email Jamila Jackson. So Dr. Jamila Jackson, do you know if that's just jamila.jackson@va.gov?
Hey, Tiffany, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, so it is Jamila Jackson at va.gov.
Great. Thank you. And I have to say, this is, I appreciate you guys giving us like this rundown of all the resources that have been pulled together over the past decade. It's just amazing how much work has gone into this. And I didn't know about probably at least 3/4 to maybe 90% of the things that have been going on. So I really appreciate just being more in the loop. If Michelle hadn't asked that question, I would have asked too, like, how do we join the Listserv? How do we find out more, about these ongoing events?
Yeah, so this is Jessica Fulton again, and I would just say that one of the things about doing this particular project for me that has been really helpful is that I've only been on the committee for a year, and I've been trying to get on this committee for a very long time. And actually, my training director was Loretta Braxton, who was the original co-chair of the committee. So that's how I first learned about it. And this has been, so I've been trying to get in the loop with this. And so this project has been really fun because it's helped me sort of go through over the years since the last time that we presented on everything that's been done. And it is really just mind-boggling the amount of things that the MDC does. And I think it really is a testament to all of the past members, and that was one of the reasons that I really wanted to try to have those folks listed, because these projects have been going on for years and being refined, and so they really are super productive, and the trainees are amazing. You can tell by Darlene and Jessica. We have really terrific trainees, so we're fortunate.
It's great, all the work that's gone into this. I see another question's being typed right now. Let's see. Dr. Boyd wrote that she's getting a message on Outlook that we won't be able to deliver the message to that email address because it's no longer. Okay. Check the spelling there.
Oh, she just changed her email address. Interesting. Okay, she has a middle initial in there now. Gonna have to tell her she caused a problem in our presentation. She must have just changed.
Dr. Boyd, thanks for bringing that to our attention.
Yeah,
we could get that corrected. All right, so it's Jamila K. So no period between Jamila and K. It's just jamilak.jackson@va.gov.
That is correct.
Okay. And any other questions from the audience?
Hi, this is Jessica Jackson. I just want to, while we're waiting for other questions, I just want to also note what a great experience it has been to be a trainee on the committee and to encourage training directors or staff to encourage your trainees to apply. It is an application process that happens in the fall because you learn a lot. It's been really helpful for me to learn not just more about diversity, multiculturalism, and training in the VA, but also just an experience of learning how to be able to be a better advocate, a little bit about just learning policies, professional development. It's been a really awesome experience that I think trainees may not always be aware of, or they may not always be aware of the opportunity to apply. It is a year-long commitment, but the commitment is the year for your training program, so whenever your training time ends. But I do highly encourage people to encourage their trainees to apply. So even if they do not have the time as staff to be a part of the committee, it's an awesome opportunity for trainees. And often for me, I'm able to relay information back to my training director and in meetings, be able to point them to resources that they may not know about. So I just wanted to note how awesome an opportunity it has been, and I'm truly grateful to have had the chance.
Jessica, thank you for
Sorry, go ahead. Someone speaking?
Darlene, was that you?
Yes. I would just like to follow up and just add to what Dr. Jackson has pointed out as a fellow. I think I had the opportunity to know about it probably in my internship year, I think I would have definitely attempted to do so. I think it has been invaluable at this level of my career just because of how I can see at this stage how important it is to integrate diversity aspects into every point of training. And so being able to be on this committee has allowed me to see all facets, specifically with the part of the presentation that I spoke on, the accreditation and the policy, something that I would have never come across or even known existed, and thinking about how that influences kind of my overall, and has influenced my overall training experience. I think I would second what Dr. Jackson has said, in that please encourage your trainees to be involved. One of the things, I'm working on the project with the paper about the selection, and one of the things that has come out of the data is that the trainees are interested. They're very, very much interested. So if the programs can be a bridge or a link to these experiences, I mean, it's been invaluable.
So thank you both for sharing. I was just going to say that the MDC will usually put out an invitation to put in applications for the committee for both staff. It also just depends, because they usually don't recruit staff until someone has gone off of the committee. And if you are interested as a staff member, you have to be a VA psychologist, which I'm assuming you wouldn't probably get the email if you weren't. And sometimes they'll ask for folks who have particular expertise in certain areas like disability or other areas. And in the fall, again, I think it's September, they usually send out the announcements, and we get a ton of applications. So I would just say that if you have trainees at your site that aren't selected the first year, keep applying, because there are so many people who are interested, and all of them are really, really qualified, so it's very difficult. But so usually that requires a statement of interest and a CV, and a letter from the training director saying that the trainee would have time to do it. And in general, that commitment is the conference call that we have once a month, and then about 2 to 3 hours on committee projects, as however the trainee is interested to get involved. I would say, for example, Darlene and Jessica, you all could speak to about how much time it is. I think you all have been very involved, so maybe it was more time for you. So I don't know if you all could speak to what the time commitment has been like.
Yeah, this is Darlene. I would say I was very involved. I think this is probably the second activity that I participated in. I was originally set to work with Dr. Jackson on another project, and I skipped out on that. But it's to the level that you're interested in being involved. And so it becomes about, if you're working with trainees and they're interested and they are allowed to serve on this committee, just really supporting them and helping them look at time management and learning. For me, I know this is my own personal issue, is I'm excited and interested in most things. And so I'll find myself saying, yes, 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 I want to do it all, and then not realistically having the time to do so. So it really boils down to, your interests and really, again, time management and receiving the supervision and support in the way that I have about saying, okay, really pay attention to what you can do compared to what you're interested in doing, which again, in my case, is everything. And so we know that's impossible, but it's definitely doable. It's not anything that would suck up a ton of time. It's definitely doable within most training calendars, I would say.
I would agree. The committee does a really good job of being very strategic and organized. So typically there isn't anything that you're last minute, though the 2 to 3 hours a month, I think when you apply it says 3 to 5 hours. And so basically I just worked it out with my training director and my supervisors that I blocked out an hour a week of what we called program development. And so if there was something I needed to work on for the committee, I had that time. And that kind of helped me to space things out between projects, because for all the projects I've worked on, we've had time to work on it. Like, we set deadlines, there's meetings and things like that, but there wasn't anything that was like, this needs to be done next week. So it is absolutely manageable for trainees, as long as they're communicating, I think, with supervisors and training directors about the time commitments and when projects are done. Like Darlene, I worked on several projects, and I don't think that it became overwhelming at any point. So I think the time commitment.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other questions coming up in the chat box. Maybe I'll bring this to a close unless our speakers have any final words they'd like to add.
This is Jessica Fulton. I just wanted to say thank you again on behalf of the MDC for allowing us to present updates on what we've been up to. And again, I just want to say that unfortunately Jessica Chen wasn't here, but she was a key contributor, so we've missed her today. But again, thanks to everybody.
And thank you guys for the incredible work you guys have done. Just really impressive. And I also want to thank all of our attendees for joining us today. Just want to end today with a little bit of logistics. I know this is a CE session webinar, so for those of you who are interested in receiving an hour of continuing education credit for participating in the live webinar today, you can request this by completing the online evaluation. I'll put the link to the SurveyMonkey website there right in the chat box for you for easy access. But please complete the online evaluation by next Tuesday, August 6th. I also put the link in the notes pod too. So CE for you guys, CE is free for Division 18 members and available to non-members for $15. And that fee for non-members could be paid through PayPal. And that's, again, only if you're interested in claiming CE. And then CE certificates will be emailed to you in about 2 to 3 weeks. And I'll also follow up with an email just to remind everybody about these instructions. And then finally, before we go, I want to plug our next webinar, which is a continuation of our collaboration with the Association of VA Psychologist Leaders. So Dr. Tracy Smith will present as part of the advocacy webinar series a presentation on the VA Mission Act, possible implications. And that webinar is going to be on Monday, August 19th at 3 p.m. Eastern. And I have a flyer for you that you can download and get some more information that you can from the files pod. So I hope to see you guys on August 19th, and also hope to see you all at APA next week. So again, thanks everyone for joining today. Take care. Have a good one.